Vietnam, a country that ranks 16th in the world by population and 35th by GDP, is home to Vinamilk, who landed 7th on Brand Finance's most valuable dairy brands of 2024. Vinamilk is currently valued at 133 trillion Vietnamese dong, or about 5.2 billion USD. For a country of Vietnam's size and economic status, Vinamilk is a standout success and illustrates the policy changes the country has adopted. Depending on how much you know about Vietnam, this might be surprising to hear about a billion-dollar corporation listed on a publicly traded stock exchange. After the Vietnam War ended in 1975, referred to as the American War in Vietnam, the communist faction took control of the country. This meant that businesses were government-owned and operated, and the dairy industry was no different. Many young Vietnamese professionals at the time went to study in the Soviet Union. One of these young professionals was Mai Q Lien. Lien, a Vietnamese woman who was actually born in Paris, and after earning her degree in meat and milk processing in Moscow, she returned to Vietnam in 1976. She then went on to get a job at the state-owned dairy company, which would eventually turn into Vinamilk. By December of 1992, Lien had already worked her way to CEO and had big plans. Around the same time, the tide was shifting in Vietnam. In 1989, the Vietnamese government enacted Doi Moi in response to the current economic struggles the country was facing. Doi Moi, which translates roughly to renewal or restoration, looked to remove the limitations that had held back economic growth. This included the removal of price controls on goods, lessening the restrictions around foreign investment, and increased capacity for privately owned businesses. These changes led to steady increases in GDP per capita for Vietnam, and the loosened restriction meant that Lien could take Vinamilk public in 2003. Taking a company public in Vietnam at this time meant that public ownership could not exceed 49%. This ensured the controlling portion stayed within the government. As economic growth continued to rise, Vinamilk took the opportunity to expand. Starting with only 3 factories in 1976, they added their first new factory in 1995, then another in 2001, and 2 more in 2003. By 2009, Vinamilk had 9 factories and 3 dairy farms in Vietnam and decided to expand operations outside of the country by investing in several foreign companies, including a milk powder manufacturer in New Zealand. These foreign investments continued, and in 2014, Vinamilk acquired 70% of US-based Driftwood Dairy, a California business that supplies schools with milk products for student lunches. In 2016, Vinamilk acquired the remaining 30%, and this deal was a large stepping stone towards their increased global presence. Continued loosening of government control on Vietnamese businesses was shown by a decree in 2015 that allowed companies to lift the public ownership cap, previously 49%. Vinamilk was the first to enact this option, and by 2016, public ownership had taken over the government's now only 45% stake in the business. Present day, Vinamilk has 14 dairy farms, 16 factories, and exports to 57 different countries. Even though their stock has moved mostly sideways, Vinamilk's presence as a global dairy brand remains.